guys, welcome back. Part 2 of our presidential series looking at Franklin Pierce, our 14th president of the United States. This is TJ here with Dead History, of course, and I'm here with my son, Henry.
Hi.
And we are going to jump right in here and start to look at kind of the life and the legacy of Franklin Pierce. So, first things first. Here we're going to get into just some interesting things about Pierce. As I already told you about his being a legislator, he actually fought in the Mexican-American War. Pierce appealed to President James K. Polk to allow him to be an officer during the Mexican-American War, and he was given the rank of brigadier general even though he had never served in the military before. He led a group of volunteers at the Battle of Contreras and was injured when he fell from his horse, and he later helped capture Mexico City. Pretty interesting stuff there. Yes, we're going to get into that in a minute here. I think the best thing is let's jump in. To his children. He had 3 children. They all died very young. None of them lived to see him become president. And unfortunately, we're going to talk real briefly here about a chilly day, January 6th of 1853. Franklin Pierce and his wife and their 11-year-old son, Bennie, they were traveling by train from Andover, Massachusetts, back up to Concord, New Hampshire. The family had been in Massachusetts for a funeral, and they boarded the 2-car locomotive at around 1 p.m. But minutes after settling into their seats, tragedy struck. One of the train's axles suddenly broke, and Pierce's car tumbled off the tracks and down a 20-foot embankment. The train car, according to a New York Times account of the wreck, broke in pieces like a cigar box. The accident did result in several injuries, but only one person died in the accident, and that was 11-year-old Bennie Pierce, who was actually nearly decapitated and killed instantly in the train wreck. Bennie, he was actually the 3rd son of Franklin Pierce and his wife, Jane. And Franklin Pierce basically idolized this child while he was alive. He was described, Bennie Pierce was described as an intellectual, kind, and agreeable by many of his contemporaries. So this really started to spiral Franklin Pierce down a very dark, depressed road that we will, touch on here in a few minutes. But what I'm going to show you now is I'm actually going to show you the pictures and the videos of the location in Andover, Massachusetts. So just a little bit of a shout out here real quick. I actually, from a suggestion from a friend of mine, contacted the Andover, Massachusetts Historical Society. And a very, very nice person got back to me from the Historical Society. I asked if they could help me try to pinpoint even if it's not the exact location, maybe an approximate location of where the wreck and the accident happened. Because if you look online, there's not much about Franklin Pierce. Obviously, he wasn't a very, good president. He was a pretty depressed man while even serving as president. He was an alcoholic. A lot of just dark things surrounding Franklin Pierce. So, when you look him up online, you're going to find basic information. But if you try to look up the train accident that claimed his son Bennie's life, you're not going to find much. You're going to find some original articles, maybe some newspaper articles and such, but you're not going to find a whole lot. And there definitely is no sort of historical marker or landmark. Sometimes you see those historical markers, those signs at the side of the road indicating where something happened of historical significance. There's nothing like that here. So this really did take some digging on my part. And again, with the tremendous help of the Andover, Massachusetts Historical Society, they just did a wonderful job showing me some old train rail maps, and we pinpointed exactly where it would have taken place. Now again, it's probably about a 100-yard or so, maybe a couple 100 yards of a distance, from point A to point B. But as you'll see in the video and in the pictures, this is pretty much right around the location of where the train accident took place. So this is kind of unique. Not many people, even historians themselves, have really looked into this and tried to really dive too deep into this and to trying to find this location. But I did. I thought it would be a nice little addition to this video here today. So take a look. This is in Andover, Massachusetts, and this is the approximate location of where Bennie Pierce's life tragically came to an end there in 1853. So take a look. Hey guys, how's it going? TJ with Dead History. Right there, that bridge, that train bridge that you see, I'm gonna flip you guys around. So this train bridge that I'm about to walk under, this is kind of the starting point. This is not where the station was, but this is kind of like point A, so to speak, on our little journey here to go see what I was talking about with Bennie Pierce. I'm gonna try to make it up there. So give me a second, I'll come back on. Hey guys, TJ back with you. So these are the train tracks that carried the train that Bennie Pierce died while riding. So what we're gonna do, the bridge that I was just on is like right there, or right under I was. So we're gonna be heading north, and then just south of another bridge, we should be able to get the approximate location where the accident took place. So it's looking south, but we are gonna be heading north. I'm gonna get my car and see how close I can get for you guys. Hey guys, TJ back with you. So this bridge here, the park that I was at, you can't get up there because there's all this overgrown, the snow's real deep, it's not a used train track anymore. So up over here is the train track. And if you're heading in that direction, so basically they were coming from this direction. From that park I was at, that first bridge, they were coming this way. So it was just south of this where the accident happened and it derailed. So I would probably guess that you're looking at probably 100, 150 yards tops. Not even, probably more like 75 to 100 yards that way. Now the train did go, when it derailed, off down an embankment. So I'm gonna try to get in the car and see if I can get any closer, but don't know if I'll be able to. But this is where it happened. All right, guys, so there's that station that I was at just a few minutes ago. And then see, the tracks are up there behind these houses. So, up here on this, that's the train track line up there. So where it actually crashed was probably down this block. And you can see, if you look in between the houses, see how it's definitely up, it's raised up. So the embankment, I would say that's a solid 20 feet of an embankment. So I'm gonna say probably behind one of these houses right around here. Behind there is where the train crashed that claimed Bennie Pierce's life. So I'm gonna now show you the house that they took him to. Hey guys, so this behind me, this is actually 7 Argyle Street in Andover, Massachusetts. And this is the actual building, or where it stood at least, where they took Bennie Pierce's body after the accident. So I'm gonna flip you guys perspective. So here's 7 Argyle. So that one station that I was at, where I couldn't get up anywhere, is probably like right out over here. Tracks would be kind of behind here, and that park that we originally started at, Penguin Park it's called, is over here. So what probably happened, as I said, the accident probably occurred, that block that I showed you guys with all the houses is 1 block over behind this. So probably happened approximately right behind the location of this by a block. And then they took his body and the other injured people in the accident here. But obviously Bennie Pierce was the only one to die. It was January of 1863, I believe. So there you go. And I just wanted a quick correction. There's 7 Argyle Street where they took Bennie's body. It was actually 1853. I said 1863. So right over there, you might be able to see it if I zoom. Can't zoom. So right there is the tunnel. That's the first tunnel. Second tunnel's like over that way. Bridge, tunnel, little thing. So again, accident probably happened right about behind there. Thanks guys, appreciate you watching. So there you go. The location of, or the approximate location of where that took place, that terrible accident that claimed Bennie Pierce's life. Very sad indeed. Pierce, he married a woman by the name of Jane Means Appleton in 1834. And after Pierce's son died, he became president. He really just was deeply depressed. The truth of the matter is that, his personal life devastated him as president. He was basically a man shattered. He was a drunk in the White House. He was highly, highly depressed. He was known for basically not paying attention in cabinet meetings. He was pretty much almost dysfunctional. I mean, that's really what you could say. The White House during his term became just a miserable place, and his wife, Jane, she basically blamed her husband's political career and his desire for political fame. She blamed him for the tragedy of their son. And Mrs. Pierce, Jane Pierce, she never recovered. She really didn't. She just was a mess the entire presidency of Franklin Pierce. She just never recovered emotionally and mentally from the tragedy. And he really was an alcoholic, Franklin Pierce. In fact, he was criticized during the campaign and his presidency for his alcoholism. And during the used election of 1842, the Whig Party mocked Pierce as, quote unquote, the hero of many a well-fought battle. Yeah. So it was pretty well known that he was an alcoholic. That's actually how he died. He died of cirrhosis of the liver. So basically, drank himself to death. Just some pretty crazy stuff. Pretty crazy stuff, to be honest. In 1852, when he ran for president, when he was nominated by the Democratic Party, he, despite being from the North, of course, from New Hampshire, he was pro-enslavement. So he actually, he was basically a Southern sympathizer. I think earlier I had said that, he was anti-slavery. He was not. He was anti-Civil War. He did not want to see the Civil War happen. But he was not, for being a Northerner, he was pro-enslavement. Obviously, that appealed to the Southerners. He was a Southern sympathizer. And in 1852, he opposed the Whig candidate, who was a war hero, General Winfield Scott, who right here on your screen, Winfield Scott. And that was whom he had actually served under in the Mexican-American War. So in the end, Pierce won the election based on his personality, but pretty interesting that he had served under General Winfield Scott and beat him in 1852. The voter turnout for the 1852 election was extremely low. Both Pierce and Winfield had a nearly identical party platform, so it was a pretty low turnout. And really, like I said, because of this, Pierce's personality and lack of strong opinions on delicate issues led to him winning. That's really what led to him winning. And the Democratic Party slogan of 1852 was actually, "We poked you in 1844, and we shall pierce you in 1852. Obviously, this was in reference to James Polk winning the 1844 election. And so interesting stuff, little campaign slogan that they had there. He was actually, at the time, Pierce was actually the youngest person to actually take the presidency. He was 48 years old at the time. So that is pretty interesting. And as I mentioned in our opening, he was the first president to promise his oath instead of swearing it, which is an interesting thing. He actually swore on a law book instead of a Bible, and he was the first person known, or the only, I should say, as well as being the only president to use the word affirm instead of swear. So affirm, promise, there's different accounts of that. And then, of course, he recited his entire inaugural address by memory, which was a first. So pretty interesting stuff. Within his first year of being president, Pierce was actually arrested for running over an old woman with his horse. The charges were later dropped due to lack of evidence, but yes, he was arrested about a year into his presidency, which is crazy stuff to think of, obviously. So now what I'm going to also, this is another interesting thing about Pierce. Pierce was actually the only president to keep his entire cabinet in place for his full 4-year term. He kept the same cabinet for the full 4 years. His vice president, who was William Rufus King, who's right here on the screen now, William Rufus King, he died in April of 1853, and Pierce never replaced him. But his other cabinet, stayed in place his entire 4 years. Pierce was quite vocal against Abraham Lincoln for suspending habeas corpus during the Civil War. Pierce said that the government should always protect the people's civil liberties, even during times of war. So interesting stuff there. Just a little side note about Pierce. As I said, his vice president, William Rufus King, he died. He was actually in Havana, Cuba at the time of Pierce's inauguration. He was very sick and he died 1 month after they took office. So he was in Cuba, Havana, Cuba, William Rufus King, and during the inauguration, about a month after that, he died while Pierce had just taken over as president, basically. Pierce's Secretary of War, speaking about his cabinet, his Secretary of War was actually Jefferson Davis, who obviously later became the president of the Confederacy during the Civil War. So, pretty interesting stuff. Pretty crazy, actually. Another thing, he criticized the Austen Manifesto. In 1854, the Austen Manifesto, an eternal presidential memo, was leaked and printed in the New York Herald. It argued that the U.S. should take aggressive action against Spain if it was unwilling to sell Cuba. Spain owned Cuba at the time. And the North felt that this was a partial attempt to extend the system of enslavement, and Pierce was criticized for this memo. So that's kind of an interesting thing there. Now, what we're going to get into, of course, is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Because, Pierce, when he took over presidency in 1852, the United States was anything but united at the time. We were extremely divided, of course, North and South. In 1852 is when Harriet Beecher Stowe, she published Uncle Tom's Cabin, which obviously was an anti-slavery sensation. It was the first novel to ever sell 1 million copies. And even at the same time in 1852, Harriet Tubman, who obviously was someone who was very, very instrumental in the Underground Railroad, she had a $40,000 bounty on her head, which is actually the equivalent of like more than $1 million today. So there was just a lot of division going on in the country at the time that he was elected. And Pierce did support the South's legal right to own slaves. He was a Southern sympathizer and supporter, believe it or not. So this made him very unpopular in the North, even where he was from in New Hampshire. During his time of presidency, the White House was kind of like in ruins, and Congress actually gave almost $1 million in money to renovate the White House, give it basically a big facelift. And during the same time that the White House was getting their facelift, something Congress was mulling over and obviously introducing was the Trans-Continental Railroad. Now, the Trans-Continental Railroad, Pierce's administration really was destroyed by this. It basically put the country closer to civil war. And the question really was, where would the railroad start and where would it end on the Pacific coast? This was basically divided between pro and anti-slavery lines. So there was this big division of like, all right, where are we going to put this, this railroad? Where's it going to start? Where's it going to end? And actually Stephen Douglas, who you see here now on your screen, Stephen Douglas, he wanted the railroad to start in Chicago and end in San Francisco. But Southerners, they wanted it to go from Atlanta, Georgia to Los Angeles, California. So obviously there was a lot of division and a lot of, speculation on where would this start and end. And it was dividing even more so, the North and the South. And the northern route would run through the territories of Nebraska and Kansas. Well, the Southerners, they wanted the presence of slavery to be determined by settlers in the area and not by the federal government. So basically what Southerners wanted, they wanted, if it was going to go through areas like Kansas, they wanted it to be up to settlers who settled that area to determine whether or not there would be slavery in that area and in that state, in that territory. They didn't want the federal government to basically butt in. So that was a big issue. Obviously, and basically what happened was there was a dispute about the southern border of Missouri. They were going to have to split off the southern border of Missouri, and Stephen Douglas, basically, he sold this idea to Pierce. He said that to get Southern support, they had to basically get rid of the Missouri line. So that's kind of what they had to do. So by eliminating the Missouri line, the question then became like, well, how do you determine what would be a free state and what would be a slave state? And that's where all this came into question. Like, okay, well, we're going to divide and get rid of this Missouri line. Well, then where the heck does slavery start and end, in this area, in this territory? So, between that and the common misunderstanding that was the cause of the Civil War, basically whether or not the question was whether or not slavery should expand west. The same thing that obviously Millard Fillmore obviously dealt with, and then of course Zachary Taylor before him with the Compromise of 1850. Zachary Taylor didn't want slavery to expand west, and that was the big thing. Southerners wanted slavery to expand west. Northerners totally did not. So, Pierce really could have put a stop to all this. He could have put an end and a stop to all this debate by stepping in and making a firm decision, but the truth is, he didn't. He didn't stop it at all. And then Senator, Stephen Douglas, he introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And basically, Pierce favored enslavement, and he supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And what this act did is it provided for popular sovereignty to determine the fate of the practice in the new territories of Kansas and Nebraska. And this was significant because it effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820. So the Kansas territory became a hotbed of violence, and we'll get into that in a second. Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, Pierce supported the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and this put an end to the Missouri Compromise and allowed new states to decide whether they would permit slavery or not. And obviously this angered Northerners, and it really set the stage for the Civil War. And it really became bad because, Senator Douglas introduced it, Pierce signed it, and inevitably the Kansas-Nebraska Act doomed Franklin Pierce's presidency. It was the big blemish and black eye on his presidency. The settlers basically, like I said, they would determine whether or not it would be a free or slave state. And there were people flocking to Kansas, both pro and anti-slavery people flocking to Kansas to try to determine whether or not it would be a pro or anti-slavery state. And this ignited basically almost like a civil war in Kansas. It was practically a civil war in Kansas. As I said, it became a hotbed of violence and became known as Bleeding Kansas. So it was really, really bad. His acceptance of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, it was a disaster of pretty much epic proportions. I mean, it was just a disaster. The fact that Franklin Pierce, accepted and supported this. He basically stood by as Kansas became, this like site of terror and tragedy. Obviously over the question of slavery or not in the area, in the state and in the territory. And he did nothing. Franklin Pierce literally did nothing. He saw what was happening, and you know what he said as far as the goings-on and what was happening in Kansas? He said that it was beyond the sphere of the actions of the executive. Yeah. So basically what he said was, I don't have any jurisdiction or power to put an end to this, so I'm not going to do anything. And that's exactly what he did. He did nothing. And it basically overshadowed his entire 4 years. This is what became Franklin Pierce's black eye. The reality is that Pierce was probably the most hated president in his own lifetime. The North hated him, obviously, because he supported the South. The South hated him because they felt like he didn't support them enough. It just was not good. It just was not a very good time, and Pierce really, he did nothing. He really didn't do anything at all. Couple other things. After his presidency and all, Pierce in 1856 He had become quite unpopular, as I said. He was actually not even nominated for re-election. The Democrats refused to nominate him for re-election. And, really the reality is that his administration ignited the flames between the North and the South. It just basically ignited it towards civil war. Now that it was just like a steam locomotive barreling towards civil war, and he did nothing to put an end to it. So in 1856, he had, obviously not run for re-election. He wasn't nominated. Instead, he actually traveled to Europe and the Bahamas and helped take care of his grieving wife. His wife just never recovered from the tragedy of losing all of her children, and of course her last child to be alive, Bennie, in that train accident. So it just was terrible, obviously. Pierce, he actually was opposed to civil war. He had always been pro-enslavement, but he opposed secession. He was a Southern sympathizer. He sympathized with the Confederacy, and he supported Jefferson Davis, who was obviously previously his Secretary of War. And really, many in the North, they just saw him as a traitor. They really did. They thought he was like a traitor to them. Another thing about Pierce, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Pierce did not decorate his house in mourning, and an angry mob approached him, and he explained that he did not need to prove his loyalty to America. That's basically what was said. So he was, and even his grave site and all. What I'm going to show you here, actually, this is actually the house. These are the steps that Franklin Pierce died. The house where he died is no longer standing, but these steps are still there, and this sign that you're going to see is still there. So I'm going to show you that. I'm going to show you the video and photos of that here, and then we'll get into his gravesite, and I'll tell you a little bit about his gravesite. So here is the location of where Franklin Pierce died. Hey guys, how's it going? TJ here, and that behind me, that monument, and then those steps right there, this is actually the site, the home and the death of Franklin Pierce. You kind of walk around this. Okay, there you go there. And then, so this is the house where he defended it against that mob that came to his door and said, hey, wait a minute, you're not honoring President Lincoln's death. So the house stood right here on these grounds. These are still the steps. Pretty cool stuff. So this was the site of the home of Franklin Pierce. And this is exactly where he died. Right here. Thanks, guys. So there you go. It's the doorstep defended by Franklin Pierce. Like I said, when Lincoln was assassinated, an angry mob gathered outside of this home here, right here in Concord, New Hampshire, basically demanding why he wasn't flying his American flag in memoriam. He obviously was pro-slavery, he was anti-war, but he basically, he just didn't even, he just defended himself, said he didn't have to, defend his loyalty. And then 4 years later, it was actually October 8th of 1869, to be exact, this is the house this is where Franklin Pierce died. The same house that the mob approached him at. That doorstep, those steps and all, that monument there, that's where he died. The house actually did burn down in 1981, and it's just basically, it's like a vacant lot next to a funeral home. So it's pretty interesting stuff. Like I said, little fun fact about Pierce, he actually was the first president to ever put a Christmas tree in the White House. So that's actually kind of a good thing, I guess you could say, about Pierce. Pierce's will, when he did die, his will had many specific requests to friends, including a $1,000 trust to a local library. And basically this was purchased, they purchased new books with that trust. So interesting stuff. What I'm going to show you here, what you're seeing on your screen, this is actually the he laid in state when he died. There was a public viewing held at the New Hampshire State House, which you're seeing a picture of here on your screen, the State House in New Hampshire. So basically, let me see what else. His funeral, it was held at the St. Paul's Episcopal Church, which is located on Park Street across from the State House. So that's the church there. The church basically was also destroyed in the fire, but you can actually see the location of the pew where Pierce worshipped inside this church. I'm going to show you a little video of that, some pictures of that. So you can take a look at that here. Hey guys, TJ here. So behind me, that's a statue of Franklin Pierce, and then behind us, that's the New Hampshire State Building. Let me flip you around. So, statue of Pierce here. And then you got State House. And then, so that is where his body was laid for public viewing, inside that building when he died. Public viewing. And then that church across the street, that's the church that it's St. Paul's Church that his funeral was held at. So you got a statue here of our 14th president, the State House where he was laid to rest for public viewing, and the church where his funeral was held. There you go, it's all right here. Thanks for watching, guys. And then, of course, the grave. The Old North Cemetery, the oldest in Concord, is located in the northern part of Concord and is accessible from either North State Street or Bradley Street. This cemetery was established in 1730. And Pierce's, actually, his first monument was actually this very large, it was an original grave, but it actually did not have any mention of him being president on the monument whatsoever. It wasn't until years later, till the new monument was built, that basically there was mention of him being president. Trying to see if I can find, I know there was a quote on the original grave site. I can't really see it here though. But yeah, there was definitely no mention of him being president anywhere on there, which is amazing. It was originally, the grave was originally marked with a 12-foot Italian marble shaft, here it is, atop a 3-foot granite base. And on the panel was an inscription that read, Francis Pierce, born November 23rd of 1804, died October 8th of 1869. And while the stone was inscribed with Francis and not Franklin, is really a mystery. But the lack of mention of his presidency was neither unusual nor unprecedented. In 1892, it was written that the Pierce lot is one of the most ample and beautiful in the cemetery. But over the years, the grave and cemetery fell into decay. The Windsor Daily Star reported that the grave was neglected for 85 years in a forgotten weed-grown corner of Old North Cemetery, and its location was unknown to most people except the cemetery attendants. This neglect led Grace Anderson, a Concord historian, to push for the cemetery to be cleaned up and have a more appropriate marker erected. And in 1945, yeah, believe it or not, 1945, like 80 years ago or so, her efforts were rewarded when the New Hampshire legislature appropriated $5,300 for a suitable monument. And then, of course, the new monument is inscribed with Franklin Pierce, his death date and born date, and 14th President of the United States. The new monument was set in place on October 15th of 1946. So the interesting thing, though, about his monument and his grave is the fact that it did not mention at all anything about him being president. For years, it didn't mention anything. Nothing. It didn't mention anything. And a lot of people say that this was due in part to the fact that the state of New Hampshire, where he's from and where he's buried, of course, did not recognize him. They thought that he was a traitor. They thought he was a Southern sympathizer. And during the Civil War, and because of his pro-slavery beliefs, they just looked at him as a traitor. So they just didn't mention anything about him being president on his grave up until 1945-46 time frame. Unbelievable. Crazy. So here you go. Here's a bunch of pictures and video of me taking a look at Franklin Pierce's grave there in Concord, New Hampshire. Take a look. Hey guys, TJ with Dead History here, and walking to Franklin Pierce's gravesite. Looks like they have a nice wreath here for him. When I was here the first time last year in 2020, it was like summertime, late spring, early summer, so no snow, and there you have it, Franklin Pierce's gravesite. 14th President of the United States. And there's his children are also buried here, and of course Bennie Pierce, who has the same birthday as me, by the way, April 13th. It was January 6th of 1853. So there you go. 14th President of the United States, Franklin Pierce's gravesite. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks, guys. So there you go. Look at Franklin Pierce's grave there in New Hampshire at the Old North Cemetery. So I hope you enjoyed this. I know it was a little long here, this second portion, but had some interesting thing to show you guys and tell you guys about Pierce. Of course, that that location where Bennie Pierce was killed is pretty interesting. So that's it. The life and legacy of Franklin Pierce, our 14th president of the United States, right, Henry?
Yep.
And that's the end of this addition to our presidential series. Interesting. Next week, of course, is our 15th president, James Buchanan. And then the week after that, stay tuned. You're going to be seeing a commercial soon for a 4-part series on our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. Stay tuned for about a minute to a minute and a half long commercial that I'm going to be publishing and putting on YouTube in the next week or so, advertising and promoting that. So stay tuned for that. So thanks for taking a look here. 14th President, Franklin Pierce. Right, Henry? Thanks.
Yep, thanks for tuning in.
Yep, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the subscribes. Thanks for everything, guys. Yep. And we'll see you next week.
Yep, bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.